Hare Krishna. I welcome all of you to this another episode of Srila Gurudev Ki Madhur Smrtiyan, fond memories of Srila Gurudev. I'll start this program by Jai Dhwani. Jai Shri Guru Gaurang Gandharvika Giridhari Shri Radha Vinod Bihari Ji Ki Jai, Shri Radha Ramana Ji Ki Jai, Nitvila Pravishtom Vishnu Padastota Sashrimad Bhakti Vedant Shri Narayana Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. नितिला प्रविष्टों विष्णु पादष्टोत श्रीमद् भक्ति वेदांत श्री वामन गोस्वामी महाराज की जय। रूपानुग गुरुवर की जय। वृंदावन नवदीप धाम की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। श्रील गुरुदेव की मधुर स्मृतियों की जय। गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि। Today we are very fortunate to have among us very senior devotee and disciple of Srila Prabhupada, and also such a disciple of our Srila Gurudev, Srimati Bhadra Didi, with us today joined us from New Zealand. First, I'll ask her to sing a kirtan, and after the kirtan, I'll make a small introduction for her, and then she's going to share her lifetime memories, how she came in contact with great Mahabhagavats like Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ji, also our Gurudev, and also maybe, I do not know, Bhakti Raksha Sridhar Maharaj, if she met him. So we like to hear about all these great Vaishnavas. So first we'll hear the kirtan from her. Dandat Pranam Didi, you're welcome on the program. Oh, you got Hare Krishna Didi. I think she got disconnected, it seems. Hare Krishna. Yes, Didi, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry about that.
How come we got
the wrong thing?
Okay. I thought maybe your internet connection is also weak like mine. I'm in Vrindavan, so here internet is not very strong.
Oh, okay. Hari Bol, everybody. Hare Krishna. I'm going to sing Oh He Vaishnav Thakur. And I never learned to play a musical instrument, unfortunately, so I have no accompaniment. Oh He Vaishnav Thakur, Daya Sagara, E Dasi Koru Kori, O He Vaishnav Thakur, Daya Sagara, E Dasi Koru Kori, Diya Parachaya, Shodha He Amare, Diya Parachaya, Shodha He Amare, Tumhara charan dhari, Tumhara charan dhari, O He Vaishnava Thakur, Daya Sagara, Vedasi Kuru Kori, Jaya Vegadumi, Jaya Dosha Shodhi, Jaya Guna Dehadase, Jaya Vegadumi, Jaya Dosha Shodhi, Jaya Guna Dehadase, Jaya Satsange, Deo He Amare, Jaya Satsange, Deo He Amare, O Sachi Sange Rahe, O Sachi Sange Rahe, O He Vaishnava Thakur, Daya Sagara, Vedasi Koru Kori, Ekaki Amara, Nahi Paya Bolo, Harinama Sankirtane, ekaki amara nahi paya bolo hari nama sankirtane tumi kripa kori shraddha bindu diya tumi kripa kori shraddha bindu diya deho Krishna namadhane deho Krishna namadhane ohe Vaishnava Thakura Dayara Sagara Edase Koruna Kori Krishna se tomara Krishna dite paro tomara shakati ache Krishna se tomara Krishna dite paro tomara shakati ache Amita Kangala Krishna Krishna boli Amita Kangala Krishna Krishna boli Daitava Pache Pache Daitava Pache Pache Ohe Vaishnava Thakura Doyara Sagara Edase Koruna Kori Diya Parachaya Shodho He Amare Tomara Charana Dori Ohe Vaishnava Thakura Doyara Sagara Edase Koruna Kori Oh hey Vaishnav Thakur, oh hey Vaishnav Thakur, oh hey Vaishnav Thakur, oh hey Vaishnav Thakur, Vaishnav Thakur, oh hey Vaishnav Thakur, oh hey Vaishnav Thakur, oh hey Vaishnav Thakur, Gurudev, Gurudev. Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 oh Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Hari Bol.
Hari Bol, so nice. It was such a wonderful prayer by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, glorifying the Vaishnavas, how they are Dayara Sagar, their ocean of mercy. Edase Karuna Kari, have mercy on this servant. And the beautiful last lines, Krishna say Tomar, Krishna dite paro. Krishna is yours, only you can give Krishna to anybody. Tomar Shakati Ache, it's only your power. Amito Kangal, I am like a beggar, I have nothing. Krishna, Krishna, Bali, Dhaita Pache Pache. I am shouting Krishna, Krishna and running after you. So this is the mood in which Didi sang, such a nice mood also, nice bhav, that we have nothing. We are just running after great Vaishnavas who can give Krishna, it is their property. So beautiful, Didi. We are so honored and happy to have Srimati Bhadra Didi with us today, joined us from New Zealand. She's a very, very senior devotee, practicing Krishna consciousness for a long time. And she lived as a brahmacarini in temples in Melbourne, Sydney, and Murwillumbah. She's one of the initial early pioneers of the new Govardhana community at Murwillumbah, and she got married there in 1977. In the same year, she got diksa-mantras from Srila Prabhupada. She also pioneered the new Varshana farming community in north of Auckland, New Zealand. So she has spent a lot of her time living very simply and what today may be considered extreme conditions, no electricity, no proper bathroom, etc. And she has 3 lovely children, Gadadhara, Dhruva and Vrinda. What beautiful names, who are all sincere devotees. Over those years, apart from reading the family, her services were cooking and sewing for temple deities. Then around the late 80s, she distanced herself from the management and authorities and moved away from the temple community, got her own place, and began a prasadam distribution business. She was the founder and manager of it and managed it for 10 years. Following Srila Prabhupada's directive to get land and simplify living, in 1994, they acquired an acreage in the foothills of a mountain range in New Zealand, moving into it in 2000 and beginning to develop and cultivate it. The community now comprises 3 families of Gurudev's devotees, one of them being her son Dhruva and his wife Bela, and their 3 children. And after hearing Gurudev for many years and aspiring to hear from him, she finally met him in 2002. Her heart was stolen on meeting, like everybody else's, and her whole sadhana and spiritual life rejuvenated. All of them, apart from her eldest son Gadadhar, who is already joined Sangha of Srila Bhakti Rakshak Srila-dev Gosvami Maharaja in Sri Caitanya Sarasvat Matha. All of them took shelter of Srila Gurudev then. Thus, she was with Srila Gurudev for last decade of his manifestation and spent as much time with him as she could in India, Australia, and New Zealand. Nowadays, apart from sadhana, she is investing her time in studying Shastras and serving her Gaura Nitai Thakurji, given pran-pratistha by Srila Gurudev. So we're going to have darshan of them also after the program. And outreach others, her main interests are studying Sanskrit grammar and language and Vedic philosophy. So from this, you can see how learned she is, not only in academics, but also in seva. She is able to establish such a big farm community for Srila Prabhupada, not an easy task, especially for a woman. And it is running so successfully for so many years. Not only outwardly doing seva and doing her studies in Vedic philosophy and language and Sanskrit grammar. I must say Sanskrit grammar is not an easy thing. Even scholars in India are scared to do it, and it takes around 10 years to know Sanskrit grammar. So it is a big task, and Didi is doing it. It is very, it shows her her thirst for knowledge and her thirst for bhajan. That even for Indians, it is very difficult. Even for great pandits, they don't venture in this side. In our mutt, very rarely, I think there are maybe 1 or 2 people who are learning grammar. So it is something very deep study. And also we can see the way that she sang this kirtan, her bhavs, deep sadhana and bhav is evident from the way she sang with such a beautiful voice. So I offer my dandat pranams and request Didi to start this program. And I request her to be open and tell us everything about her life, about her beautiful journey and on the spiritual path, how she met Prabhupada, how she met various Vaishnavas, what was the longing in her heart, what drove her, what is driving her now, and how come she's able to accomplish such big deeds, which generally people are scared to venture, like big farming community, making it, bringing it to life and following Srila Prabhupada's order. He wanted people to live very simply with cows and growing their own vegetables without any chemicals. And even I like to do something like this in India. So if ever we make a plan, I will ask her help for sure. So Dandat Pranam Didi, and you may start. Thank you. Sorry, I'm not, 1 sec. Oh, you can unmute yourself. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Prabhu, for that introduction. I just feel it's highly exaggerated, but thank you very much. I'm so honored to be here. I don't know about this platform. I only heard about it 2 days ago, and I didn't have any time to prepare really, but I guess in one sense one doesn't need to prepare for the most amazing and wonderful things that have happened in one's life. It's just all there in one's throat, isn't it? Ready to come out. And I also was not expecting to speak so much about Srila Prabhupada. I thought it was kind of like a platform for Gurudev memories, but I'm happy that you asked me to speak about my experiences with Srila Prabhupada, because for me, they're just interlinked. They're entwined. My two gurus have so much impacted my spiritual life that I can't really glorify one without glorifying the other. So I'll just offer my respects to them, and I will start. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Radhikaya Priyatmane Shri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Narayaniti Namane Gurave Gaura Chandraya Radhikaya Tirale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha. I offer my humble pranam to the organizers of this platform and all the Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis who may be listening. My humble pranam to you. So I'm Bhadra Dasi, and I was a latecomer to both Prabhupada and Gurudev. I didn't come to Srila Prabhupada until 1974, by which time the movement was pretty big. There were thousands of devotees. And so I didn't really get to have a whole lot of personal association with Prabhupada as some of my older senior godbrothers and godsisters did. And then again, with Srila Gurudev, he'd been touring in the West, I should say, for 5 years before I came to him. So both times when I came to my gurus, their movements were already large. So I was born to atheistic parents. They told me that there was no God. So I grew up in my childhood not thinking about God. I just thought God was just someone that religious people believed in, but he wasn't really true. But when I started to get into my teens, I started to doubt that. There seemed to be too much intelligent design around the place. Trees grow from little seeds. The seasons come with such regularity, and children take birth looking like both their mother and their father. And all these things I was wondering about. I was thinking it can't just be by chance. It can't just be coming from nothing. There must be someone behind it. And maybe there is a God. Maybe God does exist. I started to think like that, and those sorts of thoughts got stronger and stronger as I headed towards my 16th birthday. And I can remember on the night, a few nights before I turned 16, I decided I would pray to God. And praying to God was something very rare. I mean, it was foreign to me. I'd never been taught how to pray because God didn't exist. So, but I prayed very sincerely from my heart. It was like a very serious thing for me to do, a very heartfelt thing, because it was such a new thing, but it was so sincere. And I said, God, and I was envisaging whoever God is, he must be the one who's created us. He must be the one who's designed everything. And therefore, I said to him, God, if you exist, you must know that I exist, because you made me. So you must know that I exist. So if you exist, make me know you. Please make me know you if you exist. I prayed that prayer, but then it was teenage life, and I was living in the West, and I got into teenage life. There was all the attractions of the Western world, and I forgot about my prayer. And it wasn't until I was 22 that actually over those years though, I did receive books from Srila Prabhupada. People would stop me in the street and give me little books and ask me for a little donation. And I did take books a few times. I don't think I read them very much, but at least I took them and gave a donation for them. And then when I was 22, I was living in the hills here at a little community with the person who later became my husband. I'd met him and I'd gone to live with his brother and a few other young people. They had some property, not so far from where I presently live, interestingly enough. And one day we were living up there in the hills, growing our own vegetables and stuff like that. And one day a person came up there to that little community, and he was a devotee. He was a devotee. He was not initiated at the time, but his initiated name later became Balaram Das. So I'll refer to him as Balaram Das, even though he wasn't initiated then, but he was very sincere about Krishna consciousness. And he came up into the hills and he brought some of Prabhupada's books with him. And he sat with us around a campfire and he taught us how to do kirtan. He led the kirtan and he had us all singing kirtan, the holy name, the Maha Mantra. And he read to us from Krishna book. I can remember he read the story of Dhruva the gorilla, and I was hearing about how this gorilla and Balaram, they were ripping up trees and hitting each other. I was thinking, whoa, this is really far out. So that was my introduction to chanting and to actual Krishna consciousness. So the person who was to become my husband, who became Narayan Das, he was very interested. I was kind of peripherally interested. I didn't necessarily recognize at the time that this was the answer to my prayer that I'd prayed. But he was my boyfriend then. He later became my husband. My boyfriend was very interested, and he picked the brains of this person and asked more and more questions. And lo and behold, the next day, he got himself some beads and started to chant the Maha Mantra. And he was getting right into it. He was reading the books that he'd gotten from Balaram. And I was thinking, if I don't get into this too, I'm going to be left behind. That's what I was thinking. So I got myself also some beads and started to chant. And within a day, I just started chanting 16 rounds right off. I didn't, work up to it. It was 16 rounds right from the start. And we started to offer our food, everything. We were already vegetarian, by the way. We had already stopped eating meat some time ago, which is another story. But yeah, we'd become vegetarian. So that wasn't, we didn't have to adjust to that. But we began offering our food, just a little picture of Krishna. And it was a picture of Krishna, the one that was on the original Bhagavad Gita of Krishna and Arjuna with the 4 white horses, on the chariot. And we put that picture on the top of a bookshelf or something and put our food there and chanted the Maha Mantra over it. And that was how we offered our food in the beginning. And it wasn't long after that, a few months, because we kept going with that life, chanting the Maha Mantra 16 rounds a day and offering our food and reading Prabhupada's books. We got into we didn't have many books. We had the Nectar of Devotion, we had the Krishna book, and a few of the smaller books like Perfection of Yoga and Easy Journey to Other Planets. And we had a few of those books and we just devoured them. We read them like anything. And then we heard that Srila Prabhupada was coming to Australia. And of course, Australia is a 3-hour airplane flight away across the Tasman Sea. So we went and got kiwi fruit picking kiwi fruit. We worked picking kiwi fruit for about 3 weeks. We got enough money to buy a couple of airplane tickets to go and see Srila Prabhupada in Melbourne. And that was just totally an amazing experience. We stayed in the temple, which was, where do I begin? I could fill the whole hour talking about I had 3 weeks with Srila Prabhupada. He spent a week in Melbourne that first time I saw him. That was in 1975. No, that was in 1974.
Didi,
first time
you can speak in detail. Don't worry. We have 2 hours.
Oh, awesome,
So
awesome.
Yes,
Okay,
we like to hear everything.
that's really good. I'll just have a bit of water.
Yes.
My boyfriend and I, we walked into their downtown center, the devotees' downtown center, which was in the middle of, a side street off one of the main streets of Melbourne City. And it was just buzzing with activity. Why? Because Srila Prabhupada was going to be arriving in 2 or 3 days. And also they were preparing for the big Rath Yatra festival, which Srila Prabhupada was going to attend. I think it was the second Rath Yatra festival that had ever been held in Melbourne. So they already had the big carts built, but there was so much that needed to be done. The horses that were the fiberglass horses that were attached to each of the chariots of Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balaram had to be dressed and decorated, and then we had to sew the canopies and flags and all sorts of things for the ratha, for the three rathas themselves, and the rathas had to be painted, and there was just, and people were just, devotees were just buzzing in and out, and everyone seemed to be really on a mission, and it was quite different from the sort of laid back hippie life we'd been having in the hills in New Zealand. It was quite different. It was really alive, but these people had a purpose. We could see that these people really had a purpose. And they served prasadam, and prasadam was served on big flat stainless steel plates. And it was something that I just thought was heavenly. I'd never tasted anything like it. I got a dollop of it on my plate, along with a big flat bread. The devotees hadn't had time to make puris or chapatis, so they had purchased some naan bread from a nearby baker or nearby place. So we had this delicious stuff that was dolloped on the plate, along with a naan bread. It wasn't until quite some time later, because this stuff was just heavenly. I loved it. And it wasn't until quite some time later that I found out that it was khichdi. Regular old khichdi, you know. But to me, it was just so wonderfully delicious. So we had that meal, and then we were taken back to the temple to stay, and we were just thrown into the middle of the temple program, up at 4 o'clock for Mangalarti, and then sitting there for class and all these bhajans and things, and then everybody would run off and do their work that they had to do for the day. We were given plenty of work, plenty of service. I was put into a sewing room, once again, back down at that little shop, that little storefront place in the middle of Melbourne. That's where the city base was. I was sent there with a group of ladies, and we just sewed all day long. There was so much sewing to be done. And there were quite a number of sewing machines, but no tables. We were operating these sewing machines either on the floor or just on boxes, and squashed together, and the room was heaped with cloth because we were sewing, you know, big banners and big canopies for the chariots, and flags, long strings of flags. So we had to, and there was only, time was ticking away, you know. We had to get all this done before Srila Prabhupada arrived. And we just kept sewing into the night. And there was one lady, the senior lady, who was kind of organizing us. She was called, we used to call her Bhai Barbie, but I think it's more Vaivavi, I think is more correct. It's in Caitanya Sarasvat Matha, that word, that name, Vaivavi Dasi. She was a very strict but very kind leader of the ladies, and she kept us going. And you know, it was about 11 o'clock at night, and we were still sewing. And in those days, by the way, ladies used to call each other Prabhu. Everyone was Prabhu, and we understood, and it has been revealed by senior devotees that Prabhupada encouraged, although, you know, Vedically and in the scriptures, Prabhu is only used to describe male devotees or male deities. But Prabhupada seemed to break from that tradition, and he allowed the women to be called, to be addressed Prabhu as well. So I remember this was 11 o'clock at night, and we were getting tired, and we were sewing and sewing and sewing and trying to get through all this. You know, there was still like hours and hours of work to be done, only two or a day and a half before Prabhupada was to arrive. And she said, Vaivavi said, "Don't space out, Prabhus, don't space out," she said. So we had to keep going, even though we were really getting tired. But then after midnight, you know, we just couldn't stay awake, and we just slept right there amongst all the sewing, just curled up on the floor amongst all the sewing, and had a few hours sleep. And then in the morning when we woke up, breakfast was being served. So we had breakfast, And then we just continued with the sewing. I can't remember when we chanted. I guess we must have had time off to chant. I can't even remember. All I remember is that we were just flat out and we had to keep going and going and going. So somehow it all got done, and the temple, which was out in a suburb of Melbourne called St Kilda. It wasn't a plush suburb. In fact, it was old, rather kind of not exactly low class, but it was an old suburb. It wasn't an affluent suburb at all. And the temple was in a terraced house. All those houses all joined together in the streets of houses that are all built together as one block. The temple was one of them. And so that had all been repainted inside and out, the entranceway and all the rooms, and the altar had been redecorated, and the deities and new clothes had been made for the deities. That was another thing we were sewing, new clothes for the deities. The deities were Radha Ballava in Melbourne, and Jagannath Subhadra Balaram, and small Gaura Nitai. So we were sewing new clothes for all of them along with all the other sewing. And so there was just, the devotees refurbished everything for Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada was to stay in one of the Grihastas' houses. The Grihastas moved out. They went, I'm not sure where they went. They hired a little cabin or something for the few days that Prabhupada was to be in town, so that Prabhupada and his servants could live in their nice house. And that had all been scrupulously cleaned and repainted as well for Prabhupada. And oh yes, and we were making curtains for the altar and for the temple as well. That was why there was so much sewing to be done. So so there was the temple, the little terrace house temple, which was such a hive of activity, and the downtown centre. And then came the day for Prabhupada to come, and somehow everything was done. Somehow everything got done. And the chariots were repainted and they were assembled and the canopies were put on them and the horses were attached, the fiberglass horses were attached and they had their canopies over them. I can remember I made one of the, not canopies, the little like wrap thing over the back of the horse. And I was the one that made the wraps for the horses, for the fiberglass horses. That was one of my service. And I still have one. I still, as Mahaprasadam, I still have one of those wraps over the back of the fiberglass horse that I made way back in '74 at that momentous experience of preparing for my first glimpse of Srila Prabhupada. So came the day for Prabhupada to arrive, and all the devotees were, we were all bathed and ready in our devotional gear, fresh tilak on. All the men were shiny bald, and someone showed me how to put a sari on. And because I used to wear my hair kind of, so if I tied it back at all, I would wear it with I would wear it with a bit of my hair hanging out at the side. And one of the ladies said, "You know what would really please Srila Prabhupada? If you put this hair back with the rest of your hair," she said. So I did that. I did whatever they told me to do. I had already decided I'm just going to surrender to this. I'm just going to surrender, at least for a while. I'll give it a go for a few months and see how I go. So that was my idea. And so then we all got into about 6 what were known as combi vans. I don't know. In those days they were called combi vans. It was just vans. They had no seats, or maybe they did have seats. But anyway, we just packed into them like sardines. There'd be no way that the Western roads would allow that these days. But in those days, you could pack 15 or 16 people into one of these vans. And so we were sitting on each other's laps, and we were really squashed in. And we went to the airport to meet Srila Prabhupada. And so we were standing around the door of customs, where all the people from the incoming flight were coming out. And we were expecting Srila Prabhupada to come out, and all the male devotees were dancing around the door, big banging mridangas and big jumping kirtans, chanting the holy name, Jai Prabhupada. And all of a sudden, it was just amazing. A door to the other side of the door where the men were dancing, and they were all very young men, you know, late teens, early to mid-20s, a door to the other side of where the men were dancing, where we were expecting Prabhupada to come out. That door opened and Prabhupada came out and stepped out amongst the ladies. And we were just, there's Prabhupada right in our midst. It was stunning. He was just so beautiful, more beautiful in any photograph. And he was radiant and he was smiling and he was like golden form. And he was just smiling. Honestly, he was like a being that just stepped out of Vaikuntha, which of course he is, transcendental Raj. The kirtan stopped. Of course, we just all, I didn't hit the floor immediately because it was like, it was such a surprise that he came out that door and was in the midst of the ladies. And he was so beautiful and stunning that I was just mesmerized. And it wasn't until everyone else paid their obeisances that I paid my obeisances. And then the men moved in and kind of surrounded him. And we ladies were kind of pushed a little bit to the back. And we still got to keep glimpsing him in amongst the jumping and dancing of the male devotees. So then we met Srila Prabhupada. We raced back and got into our vans and raced back to the temple. And I think you're not supposed to be in front of your guru. I think that's the etiquette, but I don't think we knew any etiquette in those days. And we all got to the temple before Srila Prabhupada did. And we were having a big kirtan in the street outside the temple as he arrived in his car, which, by the way, was a Rolls Royce. They'd hired a Rolls Royce for him. And but I didn't notice that. I'm not a person to know cars at all. It was just a car to me. But anyway, the newspaper heading that night in Melbourne said, "Swami comes rolling in." So they were kind of, I don't know, you know, they were, Swami comes rolling in. And it wasn't until then that I realized, oh, the car was a Rolls Royce. I said, oh, okay. But anyway, so Prabhupada pulled up in the temple in the Rolls Royce, and we were all doing kirtan again to greet him. And he walked into the temple and onto the Vyasasana that was prepared, which looked, it was just an average sized lounge room. The house, which was the temple, it was just a domestic house, and the room, which was the temple, was just a regular sized lounge room. It wasn't so big. And the Vyasasana, but it had no furniture in it except the Vyasasana, and down the end was the altar, which was behind curtains. So it was just such, you know, my life with Prabhupada and Gurudev have been so filled with moments or times which were just kind of spiritually thrilling, for want of a better word, just like moments that you'll never forget, you know. And this was one of them. When we got into that room, I don't know how we got in, because there was 80 of us from all over Australia and New Zealand. All the devotees had come, and there was 80 of us, and somehow or other, nearly all of us got into that little room, and we were packed, of course, like sardines. And but some were not able to fit in. And they were cramming around the door, you know, straining their necks. Some of them, maybe the last dozen or so, were not able to get in. But I was lucky enough to get in, and I was about a meter or a meter and a half from Srila Prabhupada. And I sat amongst the crowd at his feet. He was up on this beautiful Vyasasana, and I sat at his feet just about a meter or so from him. And this was my first encounter with him, apart from the airport meeting. This was the first time. It was just awe-striking, you know. And the room filled with frankincense, because the pujaris had everything prepared. The room filled with beautiful, fragrant frankincense, and then the curtains opened, and there were the deities, and there was music playing. I don't know what, I can't exactly remember what was playing, but it was just overwhelming. The whole experience was just like mystic, you know, and overwhelming. It was just so attractive. And then Prabhupada sang, and he sang Jai Radha Madhava, He sang that. I got to hear him sing it personally. And he sang Jai Radha, and he was looking at these deities, Balaba, Radha Balaba, and Gopitana Balaba. You know, I didn't realize at the time, but looking back, especially after I came to Gurudev, and understood Prabhupada's ras and everything, I look back on this moment and realized the relationship that must have been happening between Prabhupada and that deity as he was singing Jai Radha Madhava. And so that was my first meeting with Prabhupada, and he spoke at a university, the Melbourne University. What's it called? Well, I can't remember the name of the university, but anyway, the Melbourne University, the devotees had arranged a program for Prabhupada to speak, and all devotees were there, all 80 of us sitting in this big auditorium, and quite a number of students had come because they'd advertised it. Devotees had put posters around the university advertising this event, and so there were quite a lot of students there. They put Prabhupada's Vyasasana on the big stage, and Prabhupada was up there with one or two of his senior men, Madhavisa, who was then Maharaj, and I think Satswarup, who was also then Maharaj. They were the two who were flanking Prabhupada on this big platform. And Prabhupada began to speak, and his speech is recorded, but I can't remember what he said, but I can't at this moment remember what he was saying. But we were all sitting there listening and spellbound when suddenly, this was a famous incident that happened. It became famous all around the world. A student stood up and started to abuse Prabhupada and say what he was saying was nonsense and rubbish, and he even used, very unsavory words. So we were shocked. I started to cry. I just started to cry. It was so shocking, and the Prabhupada's talk couldn't continue. Things kind of got out of hand. There was even a riot. Some of the devotees and some of the students started to fight each other, some of the male devotees. It was really bad. And the devotees ran and got Prabhupada's car and brought it up to the entranceway and snuck Prabhupada out through some back door and got him out. And we all ran back to our vans and jumped in our vans also. And as we were driving out of the university, I mean, how do these things happen? I don't know. But as we were driving out of the university, they threw stuff at our cars. They threw some paint. They doused the cars with paint and other stuff as we were driving out. So that was really, it shook us up quite a bit. And there was quite a discussion amongst the senior devotees. How did that happen? Why didn't we check out the venue more thoroughly before taking Prabhupada there? So that was one famous incident that happened. I think it spread all around the world. But every other incident was wonderful, really sweet and wonderful. He spoke in the town hall in Melbourne, and he spoke a lot at the temple too, and all very successful. And so that was the first time I met Prabhupada. And during that time, I kind of came to realize that Krishna consciousness wasn't something that you just tried out for a few months and then left, And I realized, actually, no, I missed out telling you about the Rath Yatra. That was another absolutely amazing experience. It was one of the coldest winters that Melbourne had for 50 years or something. It was freezing. It was a freezing winter, and we were in the middle of it. But that cold didn't bother the devotees. They just made the Rath Yatra happen. And these three beautiful, amazing chariots were pulled through the main streets of Melbourne with all our 80 devotees doing kirtan and dancing and pulling the ropes. And many members of the public were also pulling the ropes. And something told me, now, what told me, was it Super Soul? I don't know. But something told me, go up the front. Just go up the front and have a look what's happening up the very front of this procession, because there was Subhadra's chariot at the very back, I think it was Balaram's chariot in the middle and Jagannath's chariot at front. I think that's the order they were in. And then in front, very front, was a huge murti of Mahaprabhu being pulled along on a cart, like a little tray on wheels, a big tray on wheels, with this massive murti of Mahaprabhu made out of fiberglass. Very, very, very tall. I don't know, 30 feet tall. So I decided to go up the front, see what's happening. So I went up because that was where the main kirtan was happening. That was where the main rip roaring kirtan was happening, up the very front, leading the procession. So I went up there and joined that kirtan, and there was and then all of a sudden there was a car parked. We were approaching a car that was parked at the side of the road. The door opened and out stepped Srila Prabhupada. He was there to join the procession. And so he joined the main kirtan right at the front. And I was right in there. I walked, not walked, we were dancing. We danced for what seemed like an eternity. I mean, it was probably only about an hour. But it just went on, and it was such an amazing experience because I was within a meter of Srila Prabhupada for this whole time, just dancing around. There's a video of me. There's a few videos that were taken, and I can be seen in the crowd ecstatically dancing very close to Srila Prabhupada. At one time, I thought, I want to touch him. So I reached out and touched his shoulder, just very, very lightly with my fingertips. And I thought, I touched him so lightly that I thought he wouldn't feel it. But he turned around and looked at me. So that was really sweet. So then the procession came to a big auditorium and Prabhupada spoke in there to a big crowd. There was a huge big crowd had been drawn there. Prabhupada spoke. So that was the Rath Yatra festival, and Srila Prabhupada's visit came to an end, and I was living in the temple as a brahmacarini, and that was quite an experience. It was really, really amazing that people from the age of sex, drugs, and rock and roll could be drawn into a situation where there was no sense gratification. You slept on the floor. Most of us didn't even have a pillow. We didn't even have a mattress. We had a mat, just like a straw mat. On top of that would be our sleeping bag, and that was it. And we slept in rows. We slept all crammed together in the room, the girls and the boys in another room. And we had maybe a little bag or a little box with our few little possessions in it, our toiletries and change of clothes. That was it. And cold showers, because it was a domestic house, remember? And this was the temple at not Gribblehurst Road, Burnett Street, St Kilda. And it was a domestic house, and the hot water cylinder was only equipped for that. And so after the first 3 showers, there was no hot water. So the majority of the devotees bathed in cold water. And the men had a bathroom downstairs, and the women's bathroom was upstairs on the floor where our bedrooms were. And even the water pressure was very, very low. So it was like a cold trickle that we bathed under. And then I can remember after that was the miracle, that Prabhupada attracted us into this kind of life, and we loved it. We absolutely loved it. I can remember feeling how auspicious this is to be rising early in the morning and coming down to the temple and singing prayers, and after having had a cold bath, it just felt so, the fact that we were coping with it happily made us feel strong. So and the only enjoyment, the only like sensual enjoyment that there was prasadam, and we loved prasadam, and the prasadam was always so good. It was always good. It never let us down. Somehow Prabhupada had taught some of those young devotees to cook really well. And I can remember I decided after some weeks that I wanted to, because I had lots of service to do. After Mangalati, there was so much service to be done, and I was given services in connection with helping the pujaris. I would polish the brass, the arti utensils, and polish the silver of the Lord's offering plates, and other things, cleaning the kitchen and making sure the chamaras were nicely brushed, and all sorts of things like that. And making the ghee, making and dipping the ghee wicks so they were ready, and setting up the arati trays, all that sort of thing, and plenty of other things, because the lords would be bathed every morning, so their towels would come out of the bathing room. Probably about a dozen towels would come out, and they'd be smudged with sandalwood pulp and stuff from having bathed the deities. So it was my job to hand wash them in a special bowl. It was a suchi plastic bowl. Wash them and hang them out to dry. And then the evening I would, and the clothesline where they were hung, where the Lord's towels were hung, was up on the roof. So I'd there was up in the top floor of this old house, there was a kind of like a cubby hole window that I climbed out to get onto the roof, where there was a little line where I hung the Lord's towels. So anyway, these were my services, and there was a lot of service. And then after breakfast, there was more to be done. Every day we would go on Harinam Sankirtan in the city of Melbourne, and what ecstasy that was! I mean, we just loved it. Every day we'd pack into these combi vans and get down there, and we would just dance like anything. And Madhuvisa was known as the king of kirtan. I believe Prabhupada gave him that name, the king of kirtan. So the kirtans were just always really full of shakti, and we danced, and oh, it was awesome. And so I decided that I wanted to get up earlier. I wanted to start getting up earlier so that I could get my japa done before all my services of the day set in. So I decided, instead of getting up at 4, I'd get up about 3:30 or maybe even earlier. So I can't remember. I must have had an alarm clock. I can't really remember how I woke myself up, but I started getting up at 3:30, and everyone else was asleep. And I would go out of the girls' room and walk down the corridor of the house to where the ladies' bathroom was. And I'd have to, because the brahmachari's room there were far more men in the temple than there were ladies. And the brahmachari room was full. So some of the brahmacharis had to sleep in the hallways and on the floor in the hallways. So I used to tiptoe past these brahmacharis when they were still sleeping in their bed, and I tiptoe past them and to get to the ladies' shower, and then tiptoe back past them again after my shower. So yeah, that was what life was like. And so during that, the months went by, and then I wasn't thinking that I was qualified for initiation. I was thinking that I was just a newcomer. I didn't know anything. I thought that, initiation, Harinam initiation, we didn't call it Harinam initiation. We just used to call it first initiation. There was first initiation and second initiation. That was our early ISKCON terminology, as far as I experienced. And I wasn't thinking I was qualified at all. I thought I'd have to be around several more years yet before I could, prove that I was a candidate for first initiation. But anyway, the senior lady, Vaivavi, said to me one day, would you like to be initiated? Because Prabhupada was coming back again in a few months' time, the following year, which was 1975. He was coming back to Melbourne. So she said to me, would you like to be initiated? And I said, well, yes, but I don't think I'm qualified. And she said, well, you're doing everything. You're rising from Mangalati. You're chanting 16 rounds. You're doing your service regularly. You're qualified, she said. So I thought, wow, I can get initiated. Awesome. Okay. So I agreed to it. And so the months went by, and then some of the devotees went off to India, which they did each year. They would go to the Mayapur Gaura Purnima festival. Maybe about a dozen of the devotees went. And while that year, 1975, because the movement had become so big, Prabhupada wasn't personally giving names to the new initiates anymore. It seems I gleaned that his secretary servant, who was then Pushta Krishna Das, I think he was Pushta Krishna Maharaj in those days, he was choosing the names, and then Prabhupada would ordain them. You know, he would accept them, but Pushta Krishna Maharaj chose the names. So the list of initiates was given to him with our civilian names, and Pushta Krishna put our devotional names beside them. And somehow or other, I don't know to this day how it happened, but that list of names leaked out into the hands of the Australian devotees and was brought back to Australia. And when they got back to Australia, it was still 2 months before Prabhupada was to come, because he came in May, and this was like March, after Gaura Purnima. The devotees came back from Mayapur with the list of all the new initiates' names, what our names were going to be when we got initiated when Prabhupada came. So we started, once we were told what our names were, we started using our names straight away. And I was told that my name was Bhadra Dasi. And so everyone was calling, oh, Bhadra Kali. I became Bhadra Kali. And so anyway, then Prabhupada came again. And this is the phenomenal thing that the same thing happened as had happened on his first visit. The men were all dancing around the door, the customs door at the airport, that they thought Prabhupada would come out, and he actually unexpectedly came out the door right beside where the ladies were and walked into the middle of the ladies. It happened again, and it happened 3 times. That was an amazing thing. It happened each time I saw Prabhupada arrive in 1974, 75, and 76. The same thing happened. And so I've often wondered that, you know, Prabhupada did that especially because the young men, they were very rambunctious and very, you know, their Purush Bhav was definitely getting the better of them. And so I think Prabhupada gave the ladies that special mercy by walking out in front, out unexpectedly behind the men into the midst of the ladies. It happened 3 times. That was so special. And so now, this time, we had by now moved into the new temple, the new Melbourne Temple, which the devotees had purchased, which was an old Catholic boys' school. And they made the huge assembly hall into the temple. And everything was new again. There'd been work for months on end. All of us had worked on this temple, scraping away old paint and stuff and repainting every square inch of it, inside and out, and putting down new tiles and new curtains. And the temple was made beautiful. There was a new marble floor laid. And so Prabhupada arrived, and this time we were all at this new temple in Dank Street, St Kilda. St Kilda? I think it's St Kilda. I'm not sure. Anyway, Dank Street, and so that was special again. We would sit. There was more room to sit now. We didn't have to be so squashed in this nice, huge, big temple. Prabhupada was very pleased with it, and he had Prabhupada's room was in the other building that was called Prabhupada House, and the ladies' quarters were in Prabhupada House also. So Prabhupada has this beautiful rooms on one end of Prabhupada House, and the ladies' ashram was the other end of Prabhupada House. But because we were in the same building as Prabhupada, we could kind of hear things going on in his room. We could hear if he was singing or playing the harmonium, which he sometimes did. And we could see if the lights were on. And, you know, we'd come out early in the morning, or even when we went to bed, his light would be on. We'd go to bed about 10 o'clock. Prabhupada's light was still on. And then when we'd come out early in the morning, about 4 a.m., his light was on again. So we understood that he was only sleeping 2 or 3 hours in that time. And he was doing his translation work while he was right there with us, as he was doing throughout all his travels. And yes, I remember he would, after his talks, he would ask, are there any questions? So I never asked a question. I was kind of too shy and perhaps too brain dead. I don't know. I was just ready to just hear, just listen. I didn't really have questions. But somebody said, one man said, how can we understand that Lord Brahma rides on a swan? It seems kind of far-fetched. That's what one devotee asked, and Prabhupada said, what do you know with your teeny experience? So I can remember that. And then another time a devotee said, why is it that only young people are coming to Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada? We were all only teenagers in our 20s. And why are only young people coming? And Prabhupada went, old fools. He said, old fools. And he laughed. And we all laughed too. Saying that people who don't come, if they're old, old fools. So that was his joke. So many things about Prabhupada. So, one time I was lucky enough to go on 6 morning walks with him. Every morning he would go on a morning walk, and the devotees could accompany him, both men and women. And the leaders would organize the devotees in groups, and the devotees who were the deity servants would be one group. The devotees who were the book distributors would be another group. The devotees who were the cooks and kitchen crew, they would be another group, like that. So I fitted into a couple of groups. My service covered a couple of those groups. So each time Prabhupada came, I got to go on 2 morning walks with him. And he would walk in the botanical gardens, the beautiful, it's like the heavenly planets there, beautiful botanical gardens of Melbourne. It was cold because Prabhupada always came in winter to Melbourne. But, we were all rugged up and going from these wonderful crisp morning walks with Prabhupada in this beautiful setting of the botanical gardens. And so that happened each year for the three times I saw him, 74, 75, and 76. All 3, I got to go on 2 walks. So it was a total of 6 morning walks, which is quite special because in the latter days, of course, in the earlier days, devotees would have walked a lot with him. But for my era of coming, the mid to late 70s, not many devotees got to go on that many morning walks with him. So I was very fortunate. And so then we moved. A community began up north in northern New South Wales because Prabhupada was saying, get farming communities together, move onto the land. So one very proactive devotee, god brother of mine, arranged for the purchase of a property at Murwillumbah, northern New South Wales, Australia. It was a large property. I can't remember how many acres, but a large property of a lot of flat area and a lot of rolling hills. So this was purchased, and it had one house on it, one little old house on it, and there was no electricity in the house. It was, it was run down. And so a group of us, because by this time actually I was married. I'd married Narayan Das because he'd also joined and become a brahmachari. And he got initiated at the same yagya that I didn't describe my initiation. Oh, I've got to go back to that. My initiation was really special because there were 24 men, I think. No, sorry. There were 24 initiates total. There was 19 men and 5 ladies getting initiated. And we were sitting in the beautiful big new Melbourne Temple. It was the fire arena in the middle. And the whole Prabhupada gave his Harinam talk, his talk that he would give before initiation ceremonies on what it meant to chant the holy name and what the 10 offenses are and everything. He gave that talk and explained to us what initiation, Harinam initiation meant. And then we were one by one called up. And Prabhupada was sitting on his Vyasasan, flanked by Madhurisa Maharaj and Pushta Krishna Maharaj. And Pushta Krishna Maharaj, I think one of them, can't remember who, one of them called the name Bhakta so and Bhakta John, Bhakta Greg, whoever they were, called them up to receive their beads and make their vows to Prabhupada. So all the men, that happened to all the men, and what would happen is that they would go up, they would pay their obeisances in front of at Prabhupada's feet, stand up, and then Prabhupada would say to them, what are the 4 rules? And they would say, no meat eating, no intoxication, no gambling, and no illicit sex. And Prabhupada said, and how many rounds do you chant? And they would say 16 rounds. And then he would hand the beads over. And then we would pay obeisances again and go and sit down. And, he'd give us our name. Your name is. And then we would go and sit down, take our place again on the floor with the devotees. So that happened to all the 19 men. And then it was the ladies, and I was the second to last lady. In other words, I was the 4th. I was the 4th lady to be called up. And I was called up, and as I was paying my obeisances, I heard Pushta Krishna Maharaj say softly to Prabhupada, this is Bhadra Dasi. And as I stood up from paying my obeisances, Prabhupada looked at me, and he just looked at me like a laser of love. and it was just one of those, once again, another one of those kind of timeless moments. And as everybody says, and it's true, and we all experienced it with Gurudev also, that he could just see through me. And I realized, well, I can't hide anything from this person. And that look seemed to go on, but it was only a few seconds. But and his eyes were so loving, so full of love. And he said, looking at me, he said, "This name should be changed." And because I could see out of the corner of my eye, Pushta Krishna was standing right beside him, and Pushta Krishna went, "Oh, okay." So that was what gave me the impression that it must have been Pushta Krishna who'd chosen the names for us all. Because when Prabhupada said, this name should be changed, he went, okay, like that. And then Prabhupada, still looking at me, he said, Bhadra Dasi. So then he gave me my beads. And I took the beads, and then I realized, hey, Prabhupada hasn't asked me the 4 rules. And so I started to say, no. I started to try to say the 4 rules, and Prabhupada smiled and said, that's all right. So he didn't even ask me for the 4 rules, which was quite astonishing, really astonishing. So I went down, sat down with my beads, and I was just, wow, what an awesome experience. And then the last woman was initiated. But, I've often over the years wondered, I don't know why Prabhupada did that with me. Did he trust me, or did he not trust me and didn't want me to vow to something he thought I couldn't follow, or I don't know. But anyway, that was my experience. And I have done my best to follow the principles throughout my whole life. So then the New Govardhana farm, it became known as New Govardhana. And because my husband, who's now become my husband, Narayan Das, was definitely a farming type. He was a hands-on type of man. So he was sent out amongst about 10 or so other men to pioneer at this farm. And because I was married to him, I got to go too, as well as 2 other ladies whose husbands were both also there. And then began a very austere life. But we didn't complain. We didn't even think anything was wrong or bad at all. It was winter, and although northern New South Wales has got a pretty good climate, it's hot a lot of the time, but in winter the nights can get cold, and the early mornings are very cold. So we were living in tents. The ladies were living in tents outside the old White House. It became known as the White House. At that time, it was the only house on the property. Well, actually, there was another house that was over the hill, but it was even more run down. It was classified as a ruin on the map, that one. Anyway, so the men were living in the house, which had the kitchen, and once again, the lounge room of the house was made into the temple room. And we had Gaura Nitai deities And these Gaura Nitai deities had been cast by the devotees themselves. They'd cast them as brass. And I actually saw this procedure happen in Melbourne, at the big Melbourne Temple. Beautiful Gaura Nitai deities were made by the devotees. And I had a ring, I had a gold ring that I'd worn since my teenage years. And the devotee, this at the time when the deities were being cast, the people who were casting them said, "Has anybody got any gold?" Apparently it's auspicious to put some gold in when you're casting a deity. That's the understanding I had. And so I thought, I'll give my ring. So I took my ring off and put it, and it was put into, I'm not sure whether it went into Gaura or Nitai, I don't know. But anyway, those Gaura Nitai are still on the altar there at New Govardhana today with my gold in them. And so we, Gaura Nitai, were there in this very, very humble little temple. And I remember I sewed clothes for them on a machine, a sewing machine that was a treadle sewing machine, no electricity. We had no electricity. And so bathing, there was no such thing as warm water. And cooking was done on a 44-gallon drum that was cut open at the bottom so that you could put a fire in it, with a grill at the top for putting the pot on and cooking. That's how the devotees cooked for the deities and the devotees. And so I was living in this tent, and two other women in tents outside. And at the night before, when we were tired and went out to our tents, we would carry our bucket of water out, so that our bucket of water was there for bathing in the morning. A bucket of water with a little scoop, you know. And when we woke up in the morning, the bucket would have a thin film of ice on it. That's how cold it was, thin film of ice. And so we would bathe in this ice cold water. Didn't complain. We brush our teeth out there, you know, in the long grass. And it was all just exciting. It was all just, you know, we were doing this we were Mahaprabhus. Actually, I don't know if we really did consider ourselves Mahaprabhus at that time, but we considered ourselves to be Krishnas and Prabhupads, and we were following Krishna and Prabhupada's mission, you know, and it was important. It was the most important thing, and our lives were dedicated to it. So nothing mattered. There was no hardship that was too hard. I wouldn't be like that these days, I tell you. But anyway, that's what we were like in our youth. And so I got married there. We had a small fire sacrifice. My mother, who lived in Queensland, she came down for it. And I had my first baby there, Gadadhara. He was born there. And so after a while, things weren't going so well with the management. Let me put it that way. I mean, there's many multitudes and multitudes of little anecdotes I could relate. It was there that I first saw this letter on the desk of the temple president. One of my services was to clean the temple president's office every day. Well, temple president's office was just a little side room off maybe it was a sunroom or something of the house. And I used to go in there and dust and sweep and stuff. And on his desk, I saw this letter it was from Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And I read it. And it said, it was the famous letter, the famous July 1976 letter which the Ritvik people use to claim that Prabhupada authorized the Ritvik philosophy, or whatever it is. And it used the word Ritvik. I can remember reading the word Ritvik. These people will be Ritvik, and it named a few of them. It named all the who became 11 so-called gurus. But this was before Prabhupada left, obviously. And so when the whole Ritvik thing blew up, and I remembered that letter that they referred to. And when when all of us who read that letter back in those days, from Tamal Krishna Maharaj echoing what Prabhupada had said, none of us thought that it meant that there would not be face-to-face contact with our guru. None of us took it that way at all. but it was kind of construed to mean that in later times. So that was that incident, and then yes, it was my husband and the temple president. Some differences arose between them. So it was decided that we would leave. My husband and I and our small baby would leave and come to New Zealand, because after all, we were from New Zealand. And it just so happened that there was a piece of land had been purchased north of Auckland to start a farming community in New Zealand also. So we went over there to live, and we pioneered again for another couple of years, or a good year and a half, living in caravans. Caravans were put onto the property. There was no electricity, no warm water, and there was a cow shed on the land, because the land had formerly been a dairy farm. And in the cow shed, a shower was installed for both men and women to share. And you just had to sort of duck in there when you could and have a shower and cold water. And we lived in caravans, and the temple was once again another little farmhouse. And we pioneered there for the first few years, and gradually the place developed. Buildings were brought onto the property. There was a big extension built onto the temple, and we grew vegetables, and we got cows, and we were milking them, and growing quite a bit of our own food, and doing Harinam Sankirtan in the city of Auckland every week. And a big restaurant was established in Auckland City, a very successful restaurant, which must have gone on for maybe 20 years, I don't know. It eventually had to close, but it brought, even today, so many years later, I get people saying to me, I remember Gopal's restaurant. It was such a wonderful place. The atmosphere was so good. The food was so good. So that was a great era, the Gopal's restaurant era. And we actually used to hold Sunday feasts there sometimes too, eventually. And so time went by, and lots of things happened in ISKCON that weren't ideal. I won't go into all that history. Eventually, Narayan and I moved off the new Varshana, it was called. We moved off there. We had 3 children by now, Gadadhara, Dhruva and Vrinda. And we got our own place, not so, maybe 10 minutes drive from the temple in the country. And then we started our prasadam distribution business, and we ran that for 10 years. And the children had been in the school, because a school began at New Varshan. But we eventually took them out of that, and there was a big intrigue behind that too, but I won't go into that. And so I remember, wait a minute, I've got to go back to New Govardhana, because it's an important part of my journey, very important. Back at New Govardhana, before I had any children, I was just married, and actually I was pregnant with my first baby when this happened. It was November 1977, and all of a sudden we heard this shocking news that Srila Prabhupada had left his body. That's the way it was put. Of course, we wouldn't say that these days. We would say Prabhupada has gone into Samadhi, or Prabhupada has gone back to Goloka Vrindavan or something. But in those days, we said Prabhupada has left his body. And it was a shock, because none of us knew. None of us in Australia and New Zealand knew. I think devotees in India obviously knew that Prabhupada's health was very, very, on the decline. And we didn't know, though, because Prabhupada's health had gone up and down over those 4 years or so that I was with him before he disappeared. His health had gone up and down, up and down. And when it was down, the world would be asked to do 24-hour kirtan, and I had participated in quite a number of 24-hour kirtans. Devotees would chant for maybe to do 2-hour slots, and sometimes you'd have to wake up at 1 a.m. and go and relieve the devotee who was doing kirtan and take over, so the kirtan would continue, 24-hour kirtan. and singing the Nrsimha prayers over and over for Prabhupada. That had become, and Prabhupada came back to health again and continued his traveling and preaching. So when we heard that Prabhupada's health was not good, we didn't think that he was actually going to disappear. That was such a shock. And we gathered in the temple, and everyone was just bewildered. We didn't know what it meant now that Prabhupada had gone. We just didn't, know what it meant. And who was going to be our guru? Who was going to be our leader? And the temple president was on the telephone, because there was, of course, no internet in those days. The temple president was on the telephone to Vrindavan every half day, because things were happening. As we now know, the history, as we found out later, Prabhupada's transcendental body was being taken on a bullock cart around all the holy sites as he had wanted to go, and embalmed and put into samadhi. So all that was going on over a couple of days, and we were receiving the progress of this every half day when the temple president was on the phone to Vrindavan. And then he'd call us all in. I'd just been talking to, I don't know who he was talking to, but some leaders in Vrindavan, and he'd give us all the latest news. And one piece of news that came through that was really touched me, because Prabhupada had gone and we were all feeling, shocked and emotions that we'd never felt before, really. And one piece of news came through, and it was this wonderful Vaishnav. There was a beautiful Vaishnav there who was helping, and he was guiding everything, and he was so loving. And he just, because the devotees were as bewildered as we were, the devotees in Vrindavan, they were unexperienced, young Western people. They didn't know the culture of how to put a saint into samadhi. So, but this wonderful Vaishnav had been there to help out, and he just made everything clear and beautiful, and he was so loving, and the devotees were so grateful to him. And it was Narayan Maharaj. And this message was so. Sorry?
I'm asking, you did get to hear the name of Narayan Maharaj that time? It was the temple president told you, right? Okay.
Yes. They called him Narayan Maharaj. That's what they called him, yes. And he was spoken of with great respect and great fondness. And I got it in my heart, that message was so powerful. It came through the phone lines and into my heart. And I can remember thinking in my sort of shock and bewilderment that Prabhupada had disappeared, we weren't going to see him anymore, that, well, at least there's someone we can turn to. At least there's another Vaishnav we can turn to who loves us. I remember thinking that. Here I was, just, I was 27. Actually, I was not quite 27. I was 26 and a half, pregnant with my first baby. Prabhupada has just disappeared, and we just heard about this loving Vaishnav. And I thought, yeah, well, at least there's somebody we know there's somebody existing who we can take shelter of. So that was my thought. But then, life went by, and as I've told you, we moved to New Varshana in Auckland, and I had two more kids were born, and then we eventually moved off there too, and got our own place and started our samosa business, catering business, specializing in samosas. And then in the 90s came, and because we were still associating at New Varshan, we were still associating there. That was still our sangha, our community, although we didn't like a lot of things about the management, but I'm not going to go into that. And we heard that a lot of devotees were turning to Narayan Maharaj. And it was really bad, because Narayan Maharaj was a Sahaja, and he was teaching something different from Srila Prabhupada, and he was trying to poach Srila Prabhupada's disciples. It was just so bad. And so many devotees are turning to him. And I heard this, and I thought, no, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. that's Narayan Maharaj, who was the loving Vaishnava who helped us out at Prabhupada's Samadhi. And I thought I had seen the management get so many things wrong that I thought this is wrong too. I just knew it in my heart, and I never bought into that propaganda about Gurudev. And in fact, I started to think, I want to hear from Narayan Maharaj, because by this time it was like the mid-90s, the mid to late 90s, and no association with a pure devotee for 20 years. And, for a neophyte such as myself, loaded with anartas, my spiritual life had plateaued. I just didn't feel I was making advancement anymore. It was like I felt stuck, and I felt I really need some guidance. But I didn't know where to turn to. But then I heard so many devotees were turning to Narayan Maharaj, and I thought to myself, Narayan Maharaj must be very attractive. That was what I thought. And somehow this book, this wonderful book, the True Conception of Guru Tattva, which was written by Gurudev's followers, it's just a small little book, but it's packed with all the truths of Guru Tattva that Gurudev spoke. And it was distributed, and I got a copy. Somehow I got devotee, one of Gurudev's followers found me and got a copy, and I read it right through, and I couldn't understand a word of it. It was too deep for me, but I was attracted to just read every word of it. I read it right through. And then one day, the very same person who had come up to our little hippie community and sat with us around the campfire and introduced us to kirtan and japa, and had read us the story of Dhruva the gorilla, that very same person with whom we'd remained in contact over the years, Balaram Das, he came to our door one day, and he said, and he had another devotee with him, a follower of Narayan Maharaj. Of course, he became Gurudev after we came to him, but in those days we were still thinking of him as Narayan Maharaj. And he came to our door and said, did you know that Narayan Maharaj was just here in Auckland? He left yesterday. And I nearly fainted, I tell you. I thought, what? I actually exclaimed so loudly, how did Narayan Maharaj come here to our city and I didn't even hear about it? How was that? Because the ISKCON devotees, it was not spread. It was hushed, around the ISKCON devotees. Of course we didn't hear about it. It wasn't advertised, but amongst a certain group, mostly Indian people actually, had known. And Gurudev had actually been in Auckland for several days in my own city, and I hadn't even seen him. So I was quite devastated at that, because I had been wanting to hear from him. I'd been aspiring to hear from him. And so then, and I remember in those times thinking, I would like to go back to India, because I had gone to India twice, once in 1980 and once in 1982. That was back in the early New Varshana days. I'd been there twice, but not since, because rearing the children and everything takes time and energy and money, and I didn't have money to travel. And so therefore I didn't listen to that little voice that was saying to me, you can hear from Narayan Maharaj, lots of devotees are turning to him. I didn't listen strongly enough to it. And so then this was in 2001 when he came, and I missed him. But the good news was he was coming back the following year. I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll wait a year, and I'll see him when he comes in a year. So I was very, very busy. I mean, catering is very hard work. I was working 7 days a week practically with this catering business. And anyway, the year went by, and then Gurudev was to come back, and I was aware that he was coming because I'd kept track of his followers in Auckland. In fact, my Vautma Pradharshak guru, Balaram Das, had become Gurudev's follower. And he got initiated and was called Balaram by now. All those, he missed out. Balaram missed out taking initiation from Prabhupada, and he didn't want to take initiation from anyone less.
Where is he now, Didi? Where is Balaram Das now?
He lives in Auckland, He lives in Auckland. Yeah, I see him regularly. We're regularly in touch.
I think you should invite him also to the program.
I will.
Since he's
I'll
your
tell him.
yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
he would. He should. His story should be recorded for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I will. I'll tell him you asked, Prabhu. I'll tell him.
Yes.
I'll put him in touch with you.
Great.
So it was interesting that he was the one who brought me both to Srila Prabhupada and to Srila Gurudev. And
because
so
his name is Balram.
Balaram Das, yes.
Yeah, Balram is Adi Guru. He brings you to Krishna all the time. So
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, interesting, eh? Interesting. Yeah, right. So,
Yes.
So then came the time for me to meet Gurudev. By this time, we were living down on our land. We'd bought some land about 3 hours south of Auckland. This is where I'm speaking from now. Beautiful land in the foothills of a mountain range. We bought 7 acres, and because we wanted to follow Prabhupada's directive to live simply. And both Narayan and I were attracted to living on the land anyway. It was like our nature. And so I drove to, but Narayan was not so keen to, he didn't feel as attracted to the idea of meeting Narayan Maharaj as I did. So I drove up by myself to Auckland to meet him. And he was going to be speaking at a temple in Auckland. It's called Bharatiya Mandir, which it's just Indian temple, you know, it's just got everybody's there, Shiva and Parvati, Sita Ram, Radha Krishna, Lakshmi Narayan, you know, everybody's there on different altars, Ganesh, you know, everyone's there. So, and Gurudev was speaking there. The Punjas from Fiji had arranged all this. And so how did it happen? Oh, yeah, I was gathered in the temple in this Bharatiya Mandir, and there were quite a few people there, maybe 200 people, mostly Indian people. In fact, I don't think there were any other Europeans except myself. And then when Gurudev's entourage arrived, there were quite a few European devotees with him. And they all arrived, and I remember my first glimpse of Gurudev. I saw him from behind. I sort of didn't, he'd walked in a group of devotees, and I was looking, but then I saw this little old man with this silver seeker, and I just saw him from the back, and I realized, wow, that's Narayan Maharaj. And he climbs, they helped him get up onto his asana, and then we were all given headphones to wear because he was speaking in Hindi. And so all the European English-speaking devotees were given headphones to wear. Luckily, the devotees traveling with Gurudev were so kind that they were equipped with spare headphones. So I got to listen to his headphones through the headphones and hear what he was saying. And it was at that time that I first ever met Shamarani Didi. She was there. I recognized her because I knew her by photographs, but I'd never seen her, never met her before, but I met her that time. And Gurudev told, because I was listening to a translation through the headphones, and Gurudev told the story of Damodar Bhandan Leela. And I tell you, it was just, like so many devotees have said, we have to say it because everyone had the experience, have to keep saying it. It was like seeing the pastime on a movie screen. It was so vivid, even though I was listening to a translation, you know, it's just, it was mystic and amazing and wonderful. And I was so attracted to Gurudev. And then the next day, he was staying at the Punja's house. They have a house in Auckland, and that's where Gurudev was staying. So I drove there. I met all the devotees, all his Gurudev's entourage were there. I met Shamarani again and several others, and they welcomed me like anything. Happy that I was a Prabhupada disciple, another Prabhupada disciple showing interest, because actually my husband and I think our Sripad Bhagavat Maharaj, we were the last Prabhupada disciples to come to Gurudev. After us, no more came. They'd all already come. So I
I
was so
think
so the
Shoti
devotees.
Maharaj, Shoti
Shoti
Maharaj also
Maharaj?
there. Bhaktivan, yeah, he is Gurudev's disciple.
Oh,
Yeah.
was he one of the
But
last ones? Maybe he was.
that's,
Maybe he was.
yeah, Shoti Maharaj, Shashikala Didi, I think they were sort of last.
Which deity? Which deity was that?
Shashikala. Shashikala.
Oh, I thought Shashikala was before me. But anyway,
He was initiated three
we were
days
among
before he
the
left.
how many? 3 years.
3 days, yeah.
Oh,
2-3 days before.
Shashikala before Prabhupada left, before
Yes,
Gurudev
that's
left.
what I heard. Yeah, they were in the same group.
No, no. Shashikala's been around for longer than that. I can remember her. I can remember her
Was it?
quite some years
No, the
before
initiation
Gurudev.
time. They were initiated 3 days before Prabhupada left, by Prabhupada.
Oh, Prabhupada. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I thought you were saying Gurudev. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
No,
Okay.
Prabhupada.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But as far as Prabhupada disciples coming to Gurudev, taking shelter of Gurudev, I was one of the last. I was among the last to come. And yeah, I just think, when I think back how Prabhupada, Gurudev had been traveling in the West for 5 years, and I'd heard those little whispers, so many devotees are coming to Narayan Maharaj. Narayan Maharaj must be very attractive. But I hadn't listened strongly enough. I was I still to this day, I'm regretful of not coming sooner. But at least I had nearly a whole decade with him. But anyway, I'm telling you about my first private darshan with him at the Punja's house in Auckland. This is the first time I'm meeting him. Actually, the very first time I met him was that evening after having heard him tell Damodar Bandhan Leela, and he got off the asin and was walking out towards his car, and one of the devotees pushed me towards him because I was a little bit shy, didn't want to push too much. So one of the devotees were pushing me towards Gurudev and saying, touch his feet, touch his feet. So I kind of hesitantly touched his feet, and then I stood up, and somebody said, this is Bhadra Dasi, she's a Prabhupada disciple. And Gurudev looked at me and said, I want to help Prabhupada's disciples. That was the first thing he said to me. And I saw in his eyes, although they were a different color, Prabhupada's eyes are brown and Gurudev's eyes are blue, but I saw that same look of deep, profound love that I'd only ever seen in Srila Prabhupada. And that's how come I knew that Gurudev was a pure devotee. And so the next morning, I was seeing him at the Punja's house, and I was ushered into his room. There weren't many people in there. There were maybe 4 or 5 other people, including Madhava Maharaj was one of them. And I sat down at his feet, and I had a question, because my question was, if Krishna consciousness is non-sectarian, which Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur said it is, it's non-sectarian, why are we seeing different groups? Why is there ISKCON and your movement? That was the import of my question. And so somebody translated it for him. One of the Indian people, Hindi-speaking people, translated it for him. And Gurudev looked at me and said, there should be division, but there should not be friction. So, it was an answer that surprised me, and it took me quite some years to appreciate what he meant, but now we can see that, of course, people get inspired by different teachers, different leaders, different gurus, and groups form around them. And that's fine, but there should not be friction. So I thought that was a very profound statement to make. Of course, as everything the Gurudev said was. And that was the first thing he said to me, apart from, I want to help Srila Prabhupada's disciples. So I saw him on those 3 days, and meanwhile I'd urged my husband to come up. And he came up also and saw Gurudev, met Gurudev, and he went on a morning walk at one of the big parks of Auckland with Gurudev. Gurudev would not have ladies come on his morning walk as Prabhupada did. So my husband got to go on the morning walk. And And then as Gurudev was leaving, after the third day, I'd listened to him for 3 days. I listened to him speak through the headphones for 3 days, and then he was leaving, and we knew he was off to the airport. And he got into his car, and there was kirtan. The devotees were doing kirtan all around the car as Gurudev was getting into the car. And I had an ecstatic experience, I have to say. It was a kind of ecstatic experience. And I've described this so many times, and I'll continue to describe it because it was so awesome. My arms were just shooting into the air, like that, shooting into the air. And I was laughing and crying at the same time. It was just, because I was realizing, wow, Prabhupada's come back in the form of Narayan Maharaj, and I've become his follower. It was like such a wonderful experience. And so from then on, my whole heart and mind, he'd stolen my heart, of course. He just reached in and stole it without me realizing. And my mind was just full of Gurudev. It's from this point that I actually took some notes to say today. But I've just been speaking ad lib so far. But I was so full. My mind was so full. I couldn't get my mind off Gurudev, and everything picked up. I wanted to get up earlier again. I wanted to chant more japa. I wanted to focus more on my japa. I was just impelled to do these things because it is said that just by seeing a pure devotee, one wants to chant. That's his potency. And I read Prabhupada's books. Prabhupada's purports just came to life for me. And I can remember my youngest child, my only daughter, had moved away from home for the first time. She'd gone across the Tasman to Sydney, Australia, and she was looking for work. She was looking for a place to live. She was, settling in. All things were happening for her over there. And we would speak on the phone every 2 or 3 days. Once a week. I wasn't up with internet yet. I was a latecomer with that too. But we would speak on the phone. My youngest daughter, it's usually a thing that would be a thing that a mother would be absorbed in, right? How's your baby doing? She's left home. She's the only girl. She's the youngest, She's on her own in a big, strange city. Normally, a mother would have been very interested, right? So I can remember holding the phone and while my daughter was speaking, telling me all about what was happening for her. And I couldn't even concentrate. My mind was just going on to Gurudev. I was just thinking of the sweetness of Gurudev. That's how much he captured my mind. So, of December that year, that was 2002, December that year, I went to Murwillumbah with Narayan, and Gurudev was in Murwillumbah. By this time, Murwillumbah wasn't the place we lived in back in the late 70s. It had, exploded as far as devotee communities go. There's hundreds of devotees living there. New Govardhana has become a very, very big community, big thriving community, and there are devotees living all around the place. Completely transformed in the last, 25 years or so, completely grown and developed. And and Gurudev was there. The devotees had invited him there. And because, anyway, there's so many things to say. I've got to stick straight on one line of thought. And that's where I got formal shiksha from Gurudev. He was staying in one of the devotees' houses there, and he would sit on the little balcony sunroom, and devotees would come in and have darshan of him in there. And I went in with a few others, and I heard the Gayatri mantras again, because back at New Govardhana in the late 70s, in 77, not long before Prabhupada disappeared, I had received the Gayatri mantras, but via a cassette tape. They'd been played into my right ear, but via a cassette tape. So we now know that doesn't have near the same potency. And so I heard the Gayatri mantras actually for the first time from Srila Gurudev, first time from the lotus lips of a Mahabhagavat, from Srila Gurudev. So even though it is said that Prabhupada is my Diksha Guru and Gurudev is my Shiksha Guru, the actual secret is that Gurudev, in one sense, is actually my Diksha Guru too. So, but it's not said like that. I always refer to Prabhupada as my Diksha Guru. But because I heard the Gayatri mantra from Gurudev's lips, not from Prabhupada's, therefore, you know, in another sense, he's also my Diksha Guru. He's my Diksha and Shiksha Guru. So that was just wonderful. It was wonderful, wonderful being with Gurudev. Everything was so, nothing mattered, you know. There was always problems. There was always, it's the material world, you know. There was always accommodation problems and vehicle problems and sometimes relationship problems and all those sorts of things, but they just paled into insignificance in Gurudev's presence. Oh, and a wonderful thing was that my kids came, two of them, the two youngest, Dhruva and Vrinda, because of course we had been telling them about Gurudev. You've got to come and meet Narayan Maharaj. You've got to come and meet him. So they did. They joined us in Murwillumbah, and their hearts were stolen also. So that was just such a wonderful thing to see the young people who'd grown up in Krishna consciousness, you know, to the best of our ability. We brought these kids up in such a bumble puppy way, and they had never met any pure devotee like we had, Prabhupada, but they respected Krishna consciousness. But anyway, when they met Gurudev, their hearts were stolen, and they became devotees. They became committed devotees. So that was just, and so this happened to so many families all over the world. Families came to Gurudev. So that began the near decade that I spent with Gurudev. I had thought that I didn't have enough money to travel anywhere to see Narayan Maharaj, but after he stole my heart, somehow I found the money to get to India twice a year to be with him. So, you know, these miracles happen when you come in contact with a pure devotee. I would go to India a few months early before the parikramas. I would usually go like August or September and spend the 2 or 3 months with Gurudev before Vrajamandal Parikrama began. And so I got used to living at Gopinath Bhavan and other places, and seeing Gurudev there where he stayed in this beautiful room upstairs at Gopinath Bhavan. And at that time, Gopinath Bhavan was just the upstairs portion rooms were partially built, but downstairs was just a construction site. The ground was just earth, and it wasn't finished at all. We watched it, as so many devotees did, watched that beautiful building be constructed over that decade. But it was, Gurudev's rooms were made when I was there, and we would sometimes have darshan in his room, and sometimes, but he was actually living at Mathura mostly. He was in his newly built roof room at Mathura, Shri Keshavaji Gaudiya Math. And so we would take rickshaws over there from Gopinath Bhavan every afternoon, about 3 o'clock. We'd all get into rickshaws, the motor rickshaws, and go over there. It was such an adventure, such a wonderful life. And Gurudev was telling all about, he was telling Brihad Bhagavatamrita, and he went on day after day after day after day, and telling all these amazing pastimes, things that I'd never heard before. And I was listening through headphones, but the translations were good. I know that quite a lot is lost in translation, but Akhilesh Das was always a very, very good translator. He was known to be one who didn't like to miss a word, you know. And even if Gurudev stopped talking and had a bit of a conversation with someone, Madhava Maharaj or anyone in Hindi that is nearby, not addressed to the audience, still Akhilesh would explain that too, so that we knew, we English speakers would know what was happening, what was being said. So it was very good. I think we got I certainly learned masses. I learned masses. It was like a whole download of all the tattvas, and Krishna consciousness became clear finally. It made so much more sense now, and I realized how much we just had a sort of like a moon on the branch, Shakha Chandra Nyaya vision of Krishna consciousness previously. At least I speak for myself. And Gurudev filled in all the details and clarified everything and made us aware of all the tattvas and all the different scriptures and actually what Upadeshamrita was. He would give class after class on Upadeshamrita and Prahlad Charitra and the teachings of Sanatana Goswami and practically everything. What was the other famous one? Of course, what to speak of the 10th canto. What is it, the 5 chapters? Panchadhyay? Ras Panchadhyay, I think. The 5 chapters of the 10th canto, which explain the all the intimate pastimes of Krishna and the gopis, and Brahma Geet and Yugal Geet and Gopi Geet and all those. He just opened up for us. And it was like, anyway, I want to kind of stick to I want to talk about that later, but I just wanted to say about my relationship with Gurudev. I was a little bit shy of him when I first met him because his presence overwhelmed me. I think it was the power coming from him, and yet he was so humble and so down to earth. The whole package was just, and I think maybe there was a bit of leftover from my relationship with Prabhupada, which had been pretty much Aishwarya. I never really got to be close to Prabhupada in a personal sense. My relationship with Prabhupada was seeing him for those 3 weeks, in those 1 week per year in those 3 years, but then reading his books. That was my relationship with Prabhupada, and the whole mood of the wondrousness and Prabhupada up there, on a pedestal, was instilled in my heart. And I think when I met Gurudev, who was so down to earth and so humble, and his heart was so open, and he was so easily accessible, it kind of disarmed me a little bit at first. And I can remember when I had a question I wanted to ask him, and I was standing with a few devotees outside his door at Gopinatha, outside the door where he would go into his room, and he stopped in front of me and said, "You have a question?" He knew I had a question, and I just went, I couldn't speak. Oh my God, I lost my chance to speak with Gurudev. Anyway, I got over that quite quickly, and I was able to speak to Gurudev and ask him questions and things. And I had a reasonable amount of personal connection with Gurudev, although not as much as I would have liked, because the movement was so big and there were new devotees swamping in all the time. The movement was just growing like wildfire. And once again, I'd come late, and but still, I had a very, very significant connection with Gurudev, and it was the most significant connection of my life. And it was like, I remember saying to myself, well, in my youth, I fell in love with Narayan Das, but in my 50th year, I rose in love with Srila Narayan Goswami Maharaj. So yeah, Gurudev, that decade with Gurudev stands out as the most profound decade of my life. We would every year we would have the festivals with him, Janmashtami, Radhashtami, and Julan Yatra, and Gurudev would observe these festivals in such an amazing way. Like before Janmashtami, he used to do a huge parade the night before Janmashtami. He would do this big parade in the streets of Mathura, and there would be several kirtan parties. There would be pipe bands. There would be, I think, there would even be horse-drawn carts. And Gurudev would be sitting on this big float, and he's humble little Gurudev, you know. He's so humble and unassuming, and you know, he would sit on this big. Gurudev could sit under the root of a tree and be at home and be in perfect comfort, and yet he would sit on this huge big asana on this very big decorated float and be drawn through the streets with the same attitude as if he was sitting on a root under a tree. And there'd be kirtan all around, and it's just wonderful. And I remember seeing policemen bowing down to him. I saw street sweepers bowing down to him. I saw Muslim people bowing down to him. I saw people standing on their motorbike seats to get a glimpse of him. It was just like he owned Mathura, you know, and he treated everyone equally. He was equal to all. He was equal to all. He didn't see any person as greater than another. It was, as I said, you know, the street sweepers and the brahmanas were equal in his eyes. And I think that reminds me of how when he moved into the mutt, and people from all walks of life were there, brahmacharis from all walks of life in the mutt. And of course, in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, this, you know, your bodily designation is a non-issue. And his father, Gurudev's father, because Gurudev was managing Keshaviji Gaudiya Mutt. This is back in the, I don't know, maybe the 50s or 60s. And his parents came to visit him, and his father, who was a very learned man, said, "Look, you have brahmanas sitting with shudras," and Gurudev preached to them. He said, "This is, you know, Krishna consciousness. Gaudiya Vaishnavism transcends all this bodily stuff." He educated his parents, but that was Gurudev's. That was his heart. His heart was. And he showed that he saw everyone as a soul, not as their body. And that was specifically prominent, perhaps, for us ladies who'd come from ISKCON, where there had been a lot of misconceptions. In the neophyte zealousness, there'd been a lot of misconception about women's position in Vedic life. And misconception. Just neophyte misconception, and ladies had been demeaned and ill-treated and marginalized, and so some of us were feeling quite, you know, demeaned by that, and our self-esteem had suffered. But Gurudev cured all that. He cured all that. He was so merciful to the ladies. He really brought the ladies up. He invited them to speak equally with the men. He invited them to lead kirtans equally with the men. In fact, I think he sometimes had the ladies lead kirtan more often than the men, but certainly equally as often. And he was just so loving and respectful. And I can remember one time him saying, "Ladies is not inferior." Ladies is not inferior. His grammar wasn't quite perfect, but that was one of the adorable things about Gurudev. Ladies is not inferior. He was really drumming that into the menfolk. So that was wonderful. He really brought the society together. He opened everyone's hearts. He made us all become mature people, and mature and educated too people. Gurudev had such a sense of humor. He would laugh, you know. He had a transcultural sense of humor. He could laugh with anybody, all people. You know, he's kind of understood the Westerners, and he understood their sense of humor. And when he laughed, his whole body would shake. And he would laugh often. He would often laugh, and everyone would laugh too, because his laughter was so infectious. But of course, Gurudev could also be very stern. And sometimes he would give a very stern talk like a pep talk. I mean, I just said that he brought us all up and made us all educated, but at the same time, he could perceive, and you know, it's a fact that we have a lot of militia attributes, not attributes, we have a lot of militia characteristics, and maybe not so strict on certain things and not controlling the mind as we should and things like that. And he would give some very strong talks sometimes about these things, which everybody would sit there and, you know, take this very seriously. He would, when Gurudev would walk along, this is in the later days, and of course I only knew the later days, when thousands of devotees were coming, and I only really saw him during the parikramas, during the festival times, Kartik months and Navadvip parikrama time, and the few weeks preceding those times, and there was always hundreds and thousands of devotees. But he would his walking, his movement anywhere from the temple to his car, from the asana to his room, wherever he would go, would take quite some minutes, because one after another devotees would be bowing down to put their head on his feet, to touch his feet, and he tolerantly moved along at a very, very slow pace because of this. Always blessing, always holding up his hand and blessing. And and as he walked along, we would stand in lines, knowing the route that he was taking to his room or to his car or whatever, hoping for his merciful glance, or even maybe to be greeted by him. And something that was another thing that happened to me, because although I did have quite a few chances to talk with Gurudev, briefly, they weren't long talks, but I had a few brief exchanges with him. There were so many times when he would walk along, and it was in amongst the devotees, and he would greet the person on this side of me, and he would greet the person on this side of me, but not me. And that happened time and time and time again. And I used to feel, he doesn't speak to me. You know, I've since found out that so many devotees had a similar experience. But anyway, I had a realization about this one eventually, and I realized, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful insight to have, that in his ignoring of me, he was actually greeting me. And what does that mean? It means that he was showing me that just to have an external exchange with the Guru is not what it's really about. It's about having the exchange with him in your heart. That's what it's about. And so many, or not so many, but a few devotees who I know had very talkative relationships with him eventually ended up leaving him. And I just kind of, I realized that he wasn't just ignoring me. He was showing me something profound. And I got that. I really got that. And that was one of the mystic things about Gurudev, the way he taught and the way he operated, where he famously used to say, I'm a surgeon and I operate on your heart. And yes, that's exactly what he did do. Oh, and there's so many things. I mean, we've been going for an hour, Prabhu. How much longer should I keep going?
You can stay for 5-10 minutes more. Yeah, if it is.
No, 5-10 minutes more.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll go on to the important thing. I feel for me it's important to mention about what I perceived was Gurudev's main mission and the legacy that he has left this world. And I'm not qualified to speak on it. And so I'm going to try and express something here, which I'm not qualified to speak on. So if any senior devotees hear me say this, and I'm open to your chiding and correction, but I don't in any way mean to sound like I have had any special realizations or anything. It's not like that. But I, as did so many, had some profound experiences with Gurudev and the Dham that were astonishing. And they're very, very hard to describe in words, actually. The English language, or at least my expression in English language, is not really capable of describing them properly, or doing justice to them. But it was like Gurudev would sometimes reveal a little glimpse or something, not even a glimpse. Once again, I don't want to sound like I don't want to sound like I'm being a sahaja or anything. I'm just trying to express something that, like for instance, one time at Jewel and Yatra was so special because it would be raining lightly, rim-jim, he used to say, the gentle rain. And we would gather at Rupsanat and Gaudiya Mat, where there was a very, very big swing, a very, very massive, beautiful decorated swing for swinging Radha and Krishna. And the devotees, everyone would take turns of swinging, but Gurudev would go first. He would swing the swing, and masses of devotees crowding around him, as was always the case in those days. And kirtan going on in this beautiful atmosphere of Rupsanat and Gaudiya Mat. And suddenly when Gurudev was swinging that swing, I suddenly felt something. I didn't see anything different. I just saw with my eyes, I saw Gurudev swinging the swing in Rupsanatan. But I kind of perceived that he was actually in Transcendental Vrindavan, engaged in that pastime of Jewel and Yatra. It was just, words can hardly describe it. It was like these kind of amazing, uplifting moments that we would have. That was one experience. And another one, and there were several, but I'll just relate a couple. Another time, I was sitting at his feet with hundreds or thousands of others on the floor in Gopinath Bhavan, and I would always try and sit as close as I could, but of course there was many, many devotees more senior than I, so I wasn't right at the front, but I was as close to the front as I could be. And he was telling, Gurudev up on his asana was telling the pastime of the Rasa Leela and how Krishna left the Rasa Leela. And no, first of all, who left first? Oh, I'm having a mental blank. Did Radha leave or Krishna leave first? Anyway, they both left, one after the other. And they met in the forest. And then Krishna left Radha. And then the gopis came looking for them. And they found Radha, but they couldn't find Krishna. And they were crying and they were in distress. And then, as Gurudev was describing this, he said, and then they came out here and sang Gopi Geet. They just went out here. I was like, out here? Right here? On the bank of the Yamuna, because Gopinath Bhavan is right there on the bank of the Yamuna. And that was another one of those moments where I thought, it kind of struck my heart, like Gurudev, he's in these pastimes. He's not simply relating them, having heard them or read them. He's actually experiencing them. So yes, these were some of the little wonderful and mystical experiences that I had with Gurudev. And forgive me for my inability to really describe them properly. Words just fall far below, but amazing times, and something that will cause one to never be able to leave Gurudev. and to know that I'm on the right path. Having met someone like Gurudev, you know, yeah. And there was just one other thing I wanted to tell. Sometimes Gurudev would speak to me via other people, which is another, I think it's another mystic aspect of Gurudev, maybe all pure devotees, but I didn't have that many chances to speak really to him and have conversations with him directly. But there was one time when I was feeling that I was attached to my family, attached to my children and stuff, my family. And I'd also heard that if you have an attachment or if you have a problem, if you tell it, if you speak it to your Gurudev, that opens a channel in your heart for him to be able to do an operation, work on you and help you with that problem. So even though it was maybe just a very, very silly and ordinary thing to say, because everyone's attached to everyone who has children has some degree of attachment to them, unless they're a Mahabhagavat, I guess. But so I said to Gurudev one time at a darshan Govardhana, I said, Gurudev, I have attachment to my family. And he looked at me and he just looked at me with that loving, strong, loving look with his eyes were smiling, you know, and but he didn't say anything. He was just looking at me. And Madhava Maharaj, who was right beside him, said, your family are all devotees. Why you want to be detached from them? So, but you know, to this day, I felt that Gurudev said it to me because Gurudev was looking at me. He was looking at me right in the eye, but I felt that Madhava Maharaj's voice spoke. It feels to me like Gurudev said that to me. That's what it feels like. And there was another incident like that too, when when I was listening to one of Gurudev's sannyasis speak, very, very humble, sweet sannyasi. And he was telling the incident of how, this is the last thing I'm going to say, by the way. He was telling the incident of how he had said to Gurudev one time, Gurudev, is there any verse in scripture, is there any shloka which specifically pertains to me? Is there any verse which will really resonate with my way of being? Is there any verse that's specifically potent for me? And Gurudev said, yes, there is. Trinadapi sanichena charorapi sanishnuna amanina amanadena kirtaniya sadahari. And when the sannyasi related this, it was like, it just struck me, you know. It was almost like Gurudev was saying it. And I've been hearing that verse since day one of coming to Prabhupada practically. But it never struck me. And of course it says in Caitanya Charitamrita that you should wear it around your neck. But it wasn't until that moment that I gained some realization of how important that verse is for each of us. And it was being related to me by the sannyasi, but I felt that Gurudev said it to me. So thank you, devotees. Gaur Premanande. Thank you very much for listening and the opportunity to glorify my gurus, or attempt to glorify my gurus. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Didi. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I would like to share some pictures now, which I've got. So let's see. Tell us about. First of all, we have Prabhupada sitting in Rolls Royce, I think. What you're describing. And all of you can see this. Can you see this?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. And what is this? Is it you?
Yeah.
Yourself?
That's not me. That's Ramaniya Dasi. But that would have been the year that I described when we were painting the chariots. That's Ramaniya Dasi.
Oh. Okay, Dharmesh Prabhu sent it to me. And what is this?
That's the temple. That's the Dank Street temple that was the old Catholic boys' school that the devotees purchased.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
that's it. That's where in that building I took initiation from Prabhupada on the ground floor.
Oh, wow. And this Prabhupada, are these your Gaura Nitai or temples?
They are actually, I'm not sure. Is that in Melbourne? Is it?
Wait,
Is
I
that
think
photo? Is that
Ramesh
photograph
Prabhu
from the?
shared. I will open the mic. He can speak also.
That would not be,
Yes,
even if, in
Prabhuji,
fact,
Yeah, Hare
will you
Krishna,
tell
Prabhuji.
about these deities?
Yes, Didi, this is from Melbourne, Gaura Nitai. Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
okay, right. So Melbourne Gaura Nitai had been purchased they'd come from India, and Srila Prabhupada gave them pran-pratistha. But the Gaura Nitai that we worshipped at New Govardhana, who'd been cast by the devotees in Melbourne, were different, not those ones.
Yeah, this is the bronze one. Came from the Mayapur.
Okay, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So it was really wonderful today hearing Didi's amazing journey, starting from was born in a atheist family and how her heart was pulled towards the power of God, and how the intelligent designs, seeds, the various animals' bodies got her thinking that there must be some power behind all these activities which I can see around me. This is what the human birth is meant for. So much intelligence God has given only to see these things and realize that there's some higher power, not live like animals, ahar nidra bhai mata, not like that. So even without any help of family or anything, it came from inside and you started your journey. The seed took you everywhere actually. The seed of knowing, trying to know things, who God is. You described yourself as latecomer, but it does not really matter, I think. If you come late or early, what matters is how deeply you connect with your guru. Even if I have seen a lot of people on this program, they have never even met Gurudev. They never met, and they took diksha from Skype. But I see they're melting for Gurudev. They have seen him through his ears, and they have so much of viraya with Gurudev. So yeah, it does not matter, but I can see your connection with Gurudev really deep. And you said you prayed for 16 years to God, and you prayed, if you exist, make me know who you are. This is the prayer we should have. We cannot know God by our own endeavors, but by his mercy we can see him. If he reveals us to us, if he feels that we are craving so much that he has to reveal himself. So that's what the prayer you made. If you exist, make me know you. Not that I want to know you. Because, and even that prayer was answered. And you said, I forgot my prayer until 22, age of 22, until you saw books from Prabhupada on the streets and donations. How intelligent these devotees are, these Mahabhagavats, how they send their books. They send people on the streets, and somehow they grab Krishna and they get them. So one day a person, Balram Das, came with books to you. And how amazing, his name was Balram, so apt for the work he was doing. Of a guru to take you towards Krishna. Not one, but both times. Even he took you to Srila Gurudev, also to Prabhupada. So we must see and listen from this great devotee who has helped you reach where you are today. And he taught you Kirtan. So books, Mahamantra, beads, got 16 rounds. You started from the very beginning. It is amazing. Not many people do this. I think very few people are inclined to do 16 rounds in the very beginning. That showed how much ready your heart was. And probably that was the reason why Prabhupada didn't ask you those 4 principles. He knew already that you are already ready. You don't have to know those. You already are beyond those things, probably. So Mahabhagavas can always see your heart very nicely. You are already a vegetarian and you had read Nectar of Devotion, Krishna book. And the way you describe it's amazing. Nectar of Devotion, Krishna book, and you said we devoured it. I mean, this is the kind of thirst you have. If you like, sometimes we read a book, one sentence, and we keep it. We see after 5 days. So that is, we don't have much thirst. But the way you described that, you just devoured everything immediately. So it's like a drop falling on a sand, which is no rain for many, and the smell comes, and so just finish immediately. So that way described. And Prabhupada came to Melbourne, second Rath Yatra festival, it described in great detail. Everyone seemed to be on a mission, yes. This is the quality of a Mahabhagat. He will engage everybody in seva, and people will be so enthused and energized, like you described. Somebody is doing something, somebody is doing, and they forgot about their homes, their families, and everything. They are so engrossed in the seva, like you described. And everybody seemed to be on a mission. I have to achieve something. And you described it as something heavenly, that experience. I'm just going to surrender to this at least for a while. So yes, that should be the, if we cannot surrender for our life initially, of course, nobody is able to, very few. We should at least surrender for a while and get a taste of it, how it feels to surrender for a while at least. And you describe Prabhupada as so beautiful, radiant, smiling, and being just stepped out of Vaikunt, as if he's coming from that willow Vrindavan. He just entered your life from there. I was mesmerized, forgot to pay obeisances also. Then you, after some time, you went to pay obeisance. Swami rolls in. Yeah, so Swami comes in Rolls Royce. And then he sang Jai Radha Madhav. You got to hear him personally. You're really fortunate. We hear his recordings now, but I can imagine the people who heard him sing personally, we have seen his expressions, his bhavs, emanating from his body, the love particles coming through him. That must be really wonderful. Then he spoke in university. So this is all the different things Mahabhagavad has to go through. So much of people are against, because even then he doesn't stop. He still wants to help all those people who become against him, like Jesus Christ. He said, don't forgive this person who killed me. So merciful they are. And in cold winters, you did that Rath Yatra. Prabhupada attracted into this kind of life, and we loved it. Yes, this kind of life is really very nice. Those who have experienced it, they know it. And you did so much seva, helping Pujari, polishing brass, kitchen, making ghee wicks, whatnot. Everything you engage yourself. Nagar Kirtan was always full of Shakti, you said. So powerful. And then your life changed. You said, I decided to get up early, do my japas before the service, so that you can do your services properly, and japa is already over when you are doing your services. Same thing happened with you when Gurudev came in your life. In between, it got a little bit relaxed, and again you said the moment Gurudev came, he energized everything back, and everything you started doing again, getting up early, doing japa properly. This is the effect of a Mahabhagavad devotee. We have to try to keep ourselves always in company or sangha of a elevated devotee than us. Even if we are not able to get a Mahabhagavad, does not matter. At least he should be more elevated than us. Then only we can progress. And then you described the look of Prabhupada as laser of love. Looked at me like a laser of love, timeless experience. So this only people who associated with Mahabhagat can know what it means, being looked at by like a laser of love. And the name should be changed to Bhadra Dasi. So his name was changed. He didn't ask you for those 4 things. And you gave your gold ring for Gaura Nitai. How wonderful to give your gold ring and Gaura Nitai comes out of it. Then how austere you lived. I mean, in India also people find it difficult to live like that. Cooking on a drum, living in the tent, no hardship was too hard. No hardship was too hard. Look at the statement, how nice. Then you said you saw the management get so many things wrong in ISKCON. And this was wrong too. What you were hearing about Srila Gurudev, how your heart is connecting, and how you can know. The people who are pure inside, they will always know that this is wrong, this is right. Even if somebody is trying to tell them, they will not believe, and you did not believe. And you believed when what Gurudev was. No association with so many years spiritually not progressing at all. That was the feeling. Once again, Balram Das enters your life, like real Balram trying to pull you towards Guru. And Narayan Maharaj was there yesterday and he left. This time he tells you this very painful thing, that he was there yesterday and he left. Oh my God. I mean, I can imagine how much viraya you're going to feel if you just miss somebody by one day. You could have associated, but you had to wait for a whole 1 year to associate with him again. And I can understand how difficult that 1 year would have been, thinking about Srila Gurudev. But that's what is Purva Rag. Gopis, before meeting Krishna, they are going through so many difficulties. That's what makes the love grow so much more. And that's what you did with Gurudev. And then you went to Bharatiya temple. Punjas has arranged this. So I must offer my pranams to Punja family, whole of the family, because they have arranged such beautiful programs for Srila Gurudev. And we are very fortunate to have tomorrow Sripad Jagdish Punja with us. So you must join tomorrow's program to see how they arrange this. First, he will describe in detail how Gurudev came to him and how he arranged this program in Bharatiya temple. Your whole family is so devoted, so much devoted, so many sevas. So we are going to have Sripad Jagannath Punjaji also tomorrow, I think, and Sri Jagdish Punjaji also. We'll hear from them their story, and English translation will be available. Those of you who do not understand Hindi, do not worry. There will be English translation available to you. So then Gurudev, you heard Damodar Bandhan Leela from Srila Gurudev. Seeing the pastime is like movie going on, even though you're listening through translation. Look at the power of Gurudev's Hari Katha. Even somebody is there in between, you're not hearing it directly, but still you are thinking you're in Golok Vrindavan. So that's for the power of his Hari Katha. And he said, I want to help Prabhupada's disciples. and deep, profound love in his eyes. I knew he was a pure devotee. Just by the look, you could make out. There should be division, but there should be no friction. Yes, division is okay, but no friction. I listened to him for 3 days on headphone. Ecstatic experience he described. Laughing and crying at the same time. Oh. This is what experience. You were dancing and you described, I was laughing and crying at the same time. My mind was full of Gurudev. Everything picked up from there. To get up early, chant more names. Prabhupada's purport came to life for me. See, Prabhupada's purport, you were reading for so many years, but it came to life and a pure devotee came. And that whole, what he was saying started like dancing in front of you. All those words, they came to life. And then heard Gayatri mantras first time from pure devotee, from Srila Gurudev. So yes, that way is your Diksha Guru also. Wonderful being with Gurudev. Problems paled into insignificance by Gurudev's presence. This is what a Mahabhagavad does. All problems you forget, and they sometimes somehow move in a corner of your life. They are still there, but they do not interfere with you. They are insignificant now. Somehow I found the money to travel twice a year. Look at the power of great Vaishnav. So many years you were not able to travel because you had no money, but now money came to you from somewhere, thin air. And not only once, but twice a year you traveled. So amazing. Every afternoon took rickshaws to Mathura for Katha, amazing pastimes I never heard before. Yes, we also people used to come from Delhi every afternoon by train and go back. Such powerful was Hari Katha that time in Mathura. I learned masses, he said. This is so wonderful to know what Gurudev has given you. Not many people know this also. To know what Gurudev has given you, what you have learned, and to be grateful to him. It is very, very important for a disciple. And you described so nicely. I learned masses. Whole download, he said. I took whole download from him. Updeshamrat, Prahlad Siksha, Sanatana Goswami Siksha, Ras Panchadhyay, Brahmar Geet, Gopi Geet, Yugal Geet. So many things he listed. This is how a disciple should be, I think, to be always grateful for what Gurudev has given, how he made his life, and how he described Gurudev as easily accessible. He knew I had a question. When you went to ask him, he already knew, oh, you have any question? And then you described your relationship as very significant relationship. best decade of my life, not only your life, but everybody's life whosoever met him. That was the best time of our life. Most resonating time, most reverberating. We were full of energy, and that time is the time which changed the flow of our life, I would say. And then you described Janmashtami festival, how you would celebrate Radhastami, Janmashtami, and how Muslims, police, street sweepers, Brahmins, everybody came going to him while he moved on his yatra. And he was so merciful to ladies, no doubt about this. He had a very, very special place in his heart for all his daughters. And he said, my daughters are like lions. They must preach boldly, not very meek like cats. They should not be like this. And I can see the way you spoke. You really spoke like a lioness. And he actually allowed ladies to speak in Gaudiya Math probably for the first time. It is not a tradition in Gaudiya Math that ladies speak on mic. But Srila Gurudev was so merciful. He did not see the physical body's outer covering of our souls, and he allowed everybody to speak, even ladies, even kids, even young devotees and old devotees, everyone. And he would say, ladies not inferior. He said his grammar was not right, but it was sweet. Yes, his grammar was not always right, but we would like to hear the same way from. And whenever I get opportunity to translate, I do not correct it, because that is how it affects us. Those words, lakhs and lakhs, he would speak so many times. So we love his strong grammar. That was so beautiful. And he had a lovely sense of humor. His whole body would shake when he would laugh. Yes, he was not like sitting bored or very serious all the time. He was serious when he was serious, but when he was in a good mood, he was very light and very humble, and could laugh with him. And he started ignoring you. Talked about it. I think Akhilesh Prabhu also talked about it when he came to talk, gave his memories. So he would do with many people. And the reason he was given by Pujapad Padmanabh Maharaj is that now you are mature, he does not need to look at you and give you response. He knows that you are in the path and you don't need that kind of nourishment from him. You are on your own now. But he would give that nourishment to the new people who are coming. He will give that energy to them. And you also had a realization that external relation is not as important as internal in your heart with Gurudev, that relation you had. And Jhulan Yatra, you described your experience so beautifully. You described about Ras, and when Guru said that gopis came here to this bank of Yamuna, you felt that he's relating so much to the place that he had actually seen that Leela right here. So those relations you had, it's true that you cannot explain this relation in words. It is the person who has it, he has it. It cannot be transferred or explained to other person. Only an indication can be given. Gurudev used to tell about Rupa Goswami's writing. He said he cannot put everything in writing, but he can give an indication. Maybe 1%, 0.1%. There is much more to it. When you enter yourself, you will see everything. And you will not want to describe, but you cannot speak. What do you speak? Nobody will understand, because it is something which is beyond this world. So they somehow try to. And sometimes he would speak to other people also. You describe that. And lastly, you said Tanadapi Sunichen, Tarorapi Saishnuna, Amanina Manden, Kirtaniya Sadahari. As I said last time also, this is the shlok where all of us are stuck on the third shlok of Shiksha Astak by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. If we can cross this shlok somehow, we can humble, then we can have entry into the beautiful treasure of Srila Gurudev's heart. But until the time we become Tranadapi Sunichi and everything is foreign to us. It's only stories in the ears, not in the heart. It's like the madhu, the what do you call it? Nectar is in a bottle and you're trying to catch the nectar. You're hitting your head on the bottle outside, but you will not get it. Until and unless we become Tranadapi Sunichen, only then the bottle will be open for us, not before that. So if we want to really taste that nectar and get inside the bottle, now we can only see from outside. Humble, we have to respect devotees, we have to be humble of the humblest, lower than everybody else. And then is the doors will be open for us. So I offer my respectful pranams to you, Didi, for telling us all your journey, beautiful journey, and amazing ups and downs, left and right, everywhere. You told us so beautifully, different parts. We could travel with you or thoughts along with you. It was so nice. And now for my pranams to all the listeners also, then the pranams to each one of you. Tomorrow, as I said earlier, we are going to have Jagdish Punja Prabhuji and Jagannath Punja Prabhuji, who was how they entered and how they did session will be available. Be there at 6 o'clock. Shri Guru Maharaj ki jai, Anant Koti Vaishnav Vrind ki jai, Gaur Bhaktavan ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, and Prabhupada Bhadra Didi ki jai, Gaur Premanande Hari Hari. Dhanyavad.